Hello, everybody, and welcome to Narrative Live. Our story tonight begins in March 2018, when America Media Inc., the publisher of the National Enquirer, published The New Kingdom. This magazine featuring Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman on the cover. Inside, MBS is portrayed as having a pivotal role as an ally of the United States against terrorism, which, if you've been following the news the last few days, is quite laughable considering we now know so much about the Saudi involvement in 9/11 that it seems almost likely that it was their operation. But nevertheless, in this 2018 publication by AMI, he's viewed as an ally against terrorism. How cynical is that? Just a month later, in April of 2018, MBS and Jeff Bezos, him as the owner of the Washington Post, but more famously as the former CEO and chairman of Amazon, had a dinner with MBS in Riyadh. And at the end of the dinner, as one does on occasion, if you're having a good conversation, you might exchange phone numbers at the end of dinner. And that's exactly what happened between MBS and Jeff Bezos. However, what happened next is very unusual because MBS, or someone using MBS's phone, used WhatsApp to send a video to Bezos. And that video apparently contained the Pegasus malware software, the Israeli software that is able to spy on people's iPhones without them having to do even anything, not even clicking on anything. It was just able to be installed on people's phones. And in this case, it was installed on Jeff Bezos's phone. And the origin of that particular video, the origin of that software, apparently was MBS's WhatsApp. This hack is obviously significant because the Washington Post was a very fierce critic of Donald Trump, but also a very fierce critic of MBS, especially around the Jamal Khashoggi murder, because of course Khashoggi was a staff member of the Washington Post. And the Washington Post had been highly critical of MBS for a number of reasons. So fast forward a good 8 months. Now we're talking about January 2019, and the National Enquirer, owned by AMI, exposes Bezos' affair based on data that it acquired from the data hack that MBS initiated against Bezos' phone. And so you saw on the front pages of the National Enquirer, but also everywhere around the world, this is not a story you could miss, that there was a cheating event going on between Bezos and his lover, and then in fact, he was heading for divorce. All courtesy, we think, of Mohammed bin Salman's ability to hack into Jeff Bezos' phone. And this is what Jeff Bezos obviously believes too, because that's what he said at the time. Now, what is this really pointing to is not so much that we are revisiting this Tawdry affair. What we really are looking at here is how MBS and David Pecker were in some sort of alliance to expose Jeff Bezos' scandalous love affair in order to respond to something else that he had done, perhaps his coverage in the Washington Post about Jamal Khashoggi, or perhaps something else. Who knows what it was? But it was retribution. We're going to expose who you are, Jeff Bezos, and wreck your marriage because we can get access to your phone. This is what happens in autocracies, everybody. This is what autocracy looks like. And it's interesting that the same kind of thing, only in reverse, really the negative version of this, is what happened when you talk about Donald Trump and David Pecker, because that relationship too involved managing the scandals coming out, this time about Donald Trump himself. And in this case, it was about catching and killing a story, not getting it and publishing it. But they're both the same thing, just two sides of the same coin. Inside the New Kingdom, I should point out, just before we leave this topic, there are some fanciful pages about how wonderful the Crown Prince is going to be leading the Saudi economy into the 21st century. And also many pages about his favorite former president of the United States, then current president of the United States, Donald Trump. Many pages on Donald Trump. And so you see that there's a symmetry there between these two networks, between Mohammed bin Salman's network, which involved David Pecker in publishing this tawdry detail about Jeff Bezos. And there's a connection between President Trump and David Pecker related to his own concealment of the Stormy Daniels affair, and of course the other ones, the Karen McDougal affair and the other story that they brought out for this case. It's important to understand that this story is not just about a prostitute and not about a porn star or an affair with the president. This is not really what it's about. What it's about is about weaponizing that personal information, controlling the weaponization of that personal information, and grab power. We spent a lot of time in the last few weeks talking about, did they sleep with each other? Was there a quid pro quo between these two people? Was there all sorts of, is Michael Cohen being honest? Is he a liar? These things are important because they form the fundamental basis of how we're going to prove him guilty or not. But this is not a case about that. This is a case about, as the prosecutor put it today, the subversion of democracy. This is a case about the theft of the most precious thing we know as Americans, which is the right to vote. America is the only country in the world that has true freedom. The only country in the world that your vote really counts because there's no crown, there's no king, there's no one else above the people. The people are it. And so what these guys were doing by controlling the narrative back then in the way that they did was allowing Donald Trump to cheat his way into the elections of 2016. And what a terrible 4 years that was when he was the president of the United States. What a calamitous 4 years that was. And we cannot let it happen again. This is how it came up in court today. The prosecutor described the meeting as three rich and powerful men high up in Trump Tower trying to control the flow of information that might reach the voters. The flow of information, isn't that interesting, that might reach the voters? And think about that and how important that flow is and who can control it. All three of them, meaning Cohen, Pecker, and Trump, Steinglass said, knew that women would be coming forward with accounts of sexual liaison with Trump. Pecker, he said, agreed to be the eyes and ears of the campaign, using his perch at the time as publisher of the National Enquirer to catch and kill their stories and protect Trump's White House bid. It was a subversion of democracy. That's what Steinglass said today, adding that the fair elections hinge on voters having access to important information about candidates. Important information about candidates, that's what elections are about. By infringing on those, by illegally paying her the money without declaring it to the Federal Election Committee, guess what? That is what puts Donald Trump in a really serious position now as a potential felon. He may be convicted this week. The purpose of that meeting was to deny that access, he said, to pull the wool over their eyes in a coordinated fashion. That alleged scheme, Steinglass said, could very well be what got Trump elected president of the United States. And indeed, I think it is. The more I think about those days following the release of the Access Hollywood tapes, the more I think about how critical those days were to the election campaign and how important it was for Donald Trump to not have any of this dirt out there. The election was so tight between Hillary and Donald Trump already, and this has not come up a lot. And I don't know why it's not come up a lot, but the GRU releasing the hacked DNC documents, which followed directly after the Access Hollywood tape, is an indicator already of how big a deal that Access Hollywood tape was, because that was immediate reactions. The Russians came in first. They were the first in there saying, we're releasing this GRU hacked data because we know how damaging the Access Hollywood tape is going to be. We've got damaging documents about the DNC. We're going to start releasing them right away in order to subvert attention, take attention away from the Access Hollywood tapes. And then another thing that would have come back at the other side would have been Stormy Daniels saying on ABC, had she done that interview that she wanted to do with ABC, Stormy Daniels would have revealed her affair with Donald Trump, and that would have changed everything, in my opinion, heading into the next election of election day, because what we landed up with as the news towards the end of October, early November, was news about Jim Comey's press conference around the Wiener emails and about how important those Wiener emails were and maybe impacting Hillary Clinton, although they were nothing new and did not impact Hillary Clinton at all. This is a nonsense press conference, which has never been done by Jim Comey. But if you looked at those if you look at what the news cycle would have been like, had Stormy Daniels' story actually been in there, the whole thing about the GRU hacked DNC emails and the Jim Comey Wiener emails, they might have disappeared, because instead you would have had the Stormy Daniels interview airing on ABC. And that would have been much bigger than any of the other stuff that they had. In fact, the last weeks of the election campaign would have been all about the Access Hollywood tapes and Stormy Daniels. And instead, you had Access Hollywood tapes and you went into GRU hacked emails and into Jim Comey's press conference. That's a big difference in how the news would have flowed that week in the final weeks of the election campaign, which ultimately gave Donald Trump the election. Just squeaked by. And so you can see that $130,000 that went to Stormy Daniels, that was serious. That's what he's talking about, a subversion of democracy. That is the thing that ultimately may have cost our country the election and our free elections, and installed this man who caused so much chaos, killed so many people through his inability to respond or refusal to respond to the coronavirus and many other things. So keep all that in mind, because that is exactly what we're talking about as this jury goes into deliberation over the next few days. They're going to be discussing not just hush money, not just Michael Cohen's believability. They're discussing the subversion of democracy. That's the important part of this. And there's been nothing worse than what we've seen in the last few years that was happened here in the United States under Donald Trump than this desire by so many people to subvert democracy.
Bill Clinton.
Nice guy. Got a lot of problems coming up, in my opinion, with the famous island with Jeffrey Epstein. A lot of problems.
That comment by Donald Trump to Sean Hannity in 2015, that was quite an enlightening event, because what we learned in that one comment is how close the circuit was, this closed circuit between David Pecker, Donald Trump, Sean Hannity, if you will, and the National Enquirer. Because just a few months earlier, Donald Trump had found out about the difficulty that they were going to have, that the Bill Clinton campaign and the Hillary Clinton campaign was going to have, from this new emerging information that Prince Andrew had an affair with one of Jeffrey Epstein's young women, if you will. Her name was Virginia Giffrey. It landed up being the result of a court case, resulting in a court case, which was huge, if you remember that court case. And it's interesting that in the week or so leading up to his CPAC speech, David Pecker, who owned the Enquirer, visited Trump on the 26th floor of Trump Tower, and he brought along these issues of Prince Andrew and Epstein on the cover. So it would have been in Donald Trump's purview, because he would have gotten these advanced copies. He gets advanced copies, it's so ridiculous, of the National Enquirer. And it would have been there that he would have learned that there was some sort of additional material coming out about Bill Clinton and Hillary Clinton. Apparently, a week or so before the CPAC speech, David Pecker shows up at the Trump Tower. Hey, look, Donald, look at the latest covers of National Enquirer, in which we reveal, guess what, that Prince Andrew has been doing some scandalous things with underage girls. And isn't this dramatic? And isn't this traumatic for everybody? And then he spills to him, according to one eyewitness, he shares with him this information that things are going to get a lot worse for Bill Clinton, because the pictures of Clinton and Epstein's girls, those are even worse, he says. So maybe they were, because look at this what happened. By the time that CPAC event had happened, this was on the cover of the National Enquirer. Donald Trump's assessment there that Bill Clinton was going to be in for a lot of trouble because of Jeffrey Epstein's island. Well, here it is on the front cover of the National Enquirer. So you have two kind of circles there that are really interesting that have been forming. And it's interesting that I'm not the only person who's highlighted this in the past. Some people have noted that there is just some symmetry happening between the empires here of Donald Trump, if you want to call him that, and Mohammed bin Salman. This is from the LA Times. It was published from the LA Times, but it's left the Washington Post logo up there to remind us that Jeff Bezos is the owner, or at least was the owner of the Washington Post. David Pecker is, of course, the publisher of the AMI. And what they're showing here is these interlocking networks between David Pecker and the Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, and then President Trump and David Pecker, which we also at that time only knew about Karen McDougal. We had none of the information from the court cases the last few weeks. But you can see that these are interlocking networks for sure, right? And what you get with these interlocking networks is a really tragic sort of circumstance where you get manipulation of elections, you get the subversion of democracy, you get the end of business as usual in a society that has relied on honest implementation of democracy, because it's been infected by a virus. And it's not a virus that's been infected. People like to blame Joe Biden all the time. I go to so many meetings and so many events, and people are always like, Joe Biden, he's terrible as president. He's not terrible as president. America is under attack, people. America is under attack by the enemies of democracy. I've been saying this for years. And as they attack our democracy, they're making things very difficult for us as a country. It happens to be that the one single thing standing between us and the end of democracy is Joe Biden. And that man is dealing with so much. It's quite remarkable that he's dealing with so much and so well at the age that he's dealing with it, that this is not a time to be attacking Joe Biden. This is a time to understand the world as it really is. What's happening to America is unprecedented in modern times. You can probably go back to the fall of Rome to really see how similar these kinds of incidents were in the fall of Rome, because there was this sort of a multilateral attack from different sides on Rome that really brought down that empire. It seemingly seemed disconnected, but in the end, they must have been connected. In fact, were connected. So if there's these entities in our world right now that seem like they should be our friends, that have been our friends in the past, that have been our allies, but are acting so out of whack because they're acting against America's interests only, it seems, then you know that there is at least a possibility that there is a deep connection between all these entities, and their main motive is to destroy America. When you think about America right now, our Constitution, which allows for 3 separate wings of government, you've got the SCOTUS, which seems to be under control of some crazy right-wing fanatics who want to fly a flag about overthrowing the government and appeal to heaven and what have you, insurrection. You've got situations like that happening between sitting justices on the Supreme Court of America. So that is not a functioning part of our democracy right now. Yeah, we meant to have 3 separate chambers of government or terms, but we're not meant to have the Supreme Court currently, as it is now, occupied by what could be these same foreign forces. It looks like MAGA, it talks like MAGA, but MAGA is largely the creation of foreign forces, of the Saudis, of the Chinese, of the Russians, of the Iranians. We can go through that at length and explain that to you later on, and we probably will. But America's under attack, and Joe Biden is the one person who's standing in the way of it collapsing, because currently the House is run by the GOP, more MAGA, and clearly the House Speaker, even though he was finally convinced to do something on Ukraine, clearly that man is still in Donald Trump's pocket, which basically puts him in Vladimir Putin's pocket, if not in MBS's pocket. Who's really running the show in America right now? 2 branches of our government are controlled by what appear to be influences by foreign governments, by people who believe that Joe Biden should have been impeached because of the Hunter Biden laptop, which was a Russian intelligence operation. Yes, the Senate is supposedly run by Democrats, but that's only technicality. And here we are now facing an election in which the final part of our very valuable democracy, which has been around for so long, may come apart. It may be taken over by a Russian asset, by a representative of these enemies of democracy. I don't even know if say it's just a Russian asset anymore, because this is such a big network. Of course, we're looking just here at a small piece of what this might look like operationally. When you've got David Pecker doing favors for the Crown Prince, Mohammed bin Salman, and defaming Jeff Bezos, while at the same time, or at least a year or 2 earlier, doing favors for President Trump so he could be elected president. And that these 2 have all these interests that they collide. And of course, the one interest I have not mentioned up until now in terms of the 2 of them connecting, Donald Trump and the Crown Prince, is Jeffrey Epstein. We know that the Crown Prince was a friend of Jeffrey Epstein and regular visits with Jeffrey Epstein. We know that President Trump was a friend of Jeffrey Epstein and had visits with Jeffrey Epstein. And I've also reported that Jeffrey Epstein was a spy actually, for Israeli military intelligence and for Russian military intelligence. So you add all those things together, and don't forget he had a Saudi passport. What am I saying that I can say is that I'm not sure that they were all involved in this blackmail operation that Jeffrey Epstein did. But I know Jeffrey Epstein ran a blackmail operation. That much I can tell you for sure. So if Jeffrey Epstein ran a blackmailing operation, and these things, they look like modern day blackmail, if you will. It may be a politer way than just blackmailing people by publishing things in the National Enquirer, but it's just as devastating. Up until now, the trial has really been about this hush money case and about whether we believe Michael Cohen or don't believe Michael Cohen, and was the president acting because he's worried about Melania, or was the president acting because he's worried about the elections? Today, finally, we heard from the prosecution about what really was in their mind when they put together these charges. And what they're asking the jury to understand is that this trial is not about $130,000 that was paid to Stormy Daniels, or whether Stormy Daniels and Donald Trump had sex or not. What it really is about is the falsification of documents, not the falsification of documents related to just, hey, I'm paying hush money, but the much more serious subversion of democracy. And these were the words that we heard today from the prosecution in the closing summaries and the closing arguments. The subversion of democracy. What a powerful term to use, especially when looking at today's hearings. Of course, there were 3 different payments involved in proving the subversion of democracy. It wasn't just the Stormy Daniels case. And I think this is one of the things that needs to be understood by everyone. It wasn't just Stormy Daniels. It was Karen McDougal, and then there was the doorman who was also paid $30,000 in hush money. So there was $150,000 went to Karen McDougal, $30,000 to the doorman, and then 130,000 went to Stormy Daniels. And then on top of that, it was $50,000 paid by Michael Cohen to a company that was falsifying polling. And then he himself received $60,000 bonus plus a lot of money in extra taxes, which he had to pay off presumably, but he maybe didn't. So let's not forget that he profited from all of that as well. But my point is that all this money flowing out of the Trump organization and AMI, all these hundreds of thousands of dollars to protect Donald Trump, guess what? That was all part of a conspiracy, not just to protect Trump, but it was a conspiracy to subvert our democracy. And that, to me, is the crux of this document and of this case that people really need to understand and underline. Let me read to you from the Washington Post. The prosecutor described the meeting as three rich and powerful men high up in Trump Tower trying to control the flow of information that might reach the voters. That's the line. That's the subversion of democracy line. The alleged scheme could very well be what got Donald Trump elected president. And I think that's exactly what happened. I think that when you look at the impact that something like a Stormy Daniels interview revealing her relationship with Donald Trump, was an outrageous relationship that spanned so many years, the fact that these things were kept quiet by Donald Trump was significant. And the fact that he would even spend that kind of money, $130,000 coming from Donald Trump on something like this, what's super significant, of course. He's not the kind of person who would spend that much money, never mind the $420,000 that it landed up costing him in paying all the taxes and in covering up all this. So clearly, this was important enough for him to pay the money. And it was important enough because everyone knew it was important. There was a line today where the defense actually stood up and said that the Access Hollywood scandal was not big. These are the things that happened around the Access Hollywood scandal that I thought made it pretty big. You had the actual Access Hollywood taping released where he talks about grabbing women by the what. And then right after that, the Russians released a whole bunch of hacked DNC documents that they'd hacked from the DNC. And they did that as a response to the Access Hollywood tape being released. Then we found out that there was this attempt by Stormy Daniels to go public and that they were going to buy it out at the Trump organization for $130,000/$420,000. So that whole event that I've circled in black here never happened. We didn't know about this until much later. And so we lost this bit of information. But when you look at the overall impact of all the stuff that happened that week, the Access Hollywood tape, and then the GRU release of those DNC documents, which was then accentuated by Jim Comey's Wiener emails fiasco of a press conference, and who knows why he did that. You can see how the balance really swung just on the one thing, pulling Stormy Daniels out of that. That would have changed everything. Stormy Daniels was in that news cycle. Do you think Jim Comey would have gotten as much news headlines? Do you think that GRU would have gotten as many news headlines? I don't think so. I think Stormy Daniels would have been the news, and they knew that. So this money that they pulled out, and as the prosecutor contended today, it was subversion of democracy. And then he says, the purpose of the meeting was to deny that access, to pull the wool over the eyes in a coordinated fashion. The alleged scheme, Steinglass said, could very well be what got President Trump elected. And indeed, I think from just my own experience covering this and everyone else's experience covering about this, it does seem to me like this was the thing that maybe triggered just enough voters, 30,000 voters in Wisconsin, to swing the election towards Donald Trump from Hillary Clinton. I've watched coverage on even MSNBC today. People are spending a lot of time talking about all these other things, but they're not talking about this subversion of democracy. The 2016 elections were stolen by Donald Trump as he paid off Stormy Daniels with that $130,000. That's a theft. That's a fraud on Americans' voters' rights. And it's not understood as that by the media, or it's purposefully being downplayed like that by the media. Which is why at the start of the show today, why I've really highlighted the relationship between MBS and David Pecker, and why I've highlighted the relationship between Donald Trump and David Pecker, and between Jeffrey Epstein and MBS and Donald Trump. They also found out today, this was the other critical piece that they needed to basically determine, is that there were in fact false business records in the case. You can't say they weren't. These documents that we've seen, the smoking gun documents and the smoking gun tapes, clearly they are what they are. This is not something you can deny. This thing happened. You can lie and say that it never happened, but this fraudulent document over here is a fraudulent document. And it's indicative of the number one thing they had to prove, that there was a fraudulent document here. So in my mind, at least there's got to be a guilty on the misdemeanor of the falsifying documents. But they've got to reach this other conclusion. They've got to reach this other conclusion that this was all done in order to affect the elections in 2016. And of course, it wasn't about Melania. It We've heard from various people who said it wasn't about Melania. So really, who is it for? It was for Donald Trump to win the elections. And we've seen, and I'm surprised this hasn't come up before, that the GRU was involved in that. The GRU was involved in responding to the Access Hollywood tape. And that it seems this other measure was done by Pecker and Trump and Michael Cohen. This audio tape, this smoking gun audio tape of Michael Cohen talking to Donald Trump and describing what they were going to do with Karen McDougal and how they're going to pay her the money. Here's that tape.
He just had, when you have a chance, he had an idea for you.
Okay. So we got served from the New York Times. I told you this regarding to unseal the divorce papers with Ivana. We're fighting it. Kasowitz is going to.
You'll never be able to get that done.
Never. Kasowitz doesn't think they'll ever be able. They don't have a.
Give me a code, please.
They don't have a legitimate purpose.
And you
So
have a woman that doesn't want to unseal.
correct.
So you've been handling it.
Yes, and it's
But
all
that's been going on for a while.
for about 2-3 weeks now.
All you have to do is delay it for.
Even after that, it's not going to ever be opened. There's no purpose for it. Told you about Charleston. I need to open up a company for the transfer of all of that info regarding our friend David, so that I'm going to do that right away. I've actually come up and
Give it to me.
I've spoken to Alan Weisselberg about how to set the whole thing up with
So what are we going to pay?
funding. Yes, and it's all the
Yeah, I was
stuff.
thinking about that.
All the stuff, because you never know where that company, you never know where he's going to
Maybe
be.
gets hit by a truck.
Correct. So I'm all over that. And I spoke to Alan about it when it comes time for the financing, which will be,
Listen, what financing?
we'll have to pay you. So
I'll pay with cash.
no. I got no.
There's no hiding here for Donald Trump. We all know what happened. What I don't think is being communicated very clearly is that what really happened was that they stole the 2016 election from the American people. And what happened afterwards was a tragedy. Not only the coronavirus, but the 4 years Trump was in power was devastating to America, devastating to our allies, devastating to our bottom line, devastating to the American people in many ways. Lost more jobs during that time than any other time in history. And just a ballooning in our treasury, which is probably been stolen from America over that time. It's never going to be recovered. So we know the consequences. Another term like that of craziness, another term of complete instability, that's what may be coming if America doesn't wake up to what they've really been delivered here, which is a con job by a con artist. We have to fight it in the next 6 months, whatever's left of this election campaign. Every single person who knows the truth, and many of you do, need to be out there pounding it and making sure that everybody understands how critical this election is. Because this is not semantics. We're not playing, autocracy versus democracy. We're talking about a way of life. We're talking about human freedom. It's as simple as that. America's the only place on earth where people are actually free. There's no other country on earth that I can think of where there's actual freedom. There's lots of countries that approximate it, but at the end of the day, they all have kings and queens and various other ways of diminishing people or cutting down their success or abilities. In the United States, that doesn't exist. And that's why America's been such an incredible open source project and delivered so much to the world, is because freedom is inspiring. Freedom is what brings the best people in the world to a place. Freedom is how we got to be the inventors of so much, whether it's Edison or everything that we've done ever since then. It's just remarkable how much technology and emergence of new ways of thinking and doing things has come out of the United States. And so that is what freedom delivers. And that's why these other countries around the world want to tear down America, is because they know how good freedom is. And they have to stop freedom if they're going to survive. They need freedom to stop. And by stopping the United States, by electing Donald Trump as a dictator, as an authoritarian leader, they're going to take away all the freedom. It's already started with the reproductive rights. It's going to continue with contraception. It's going to continue with LGBTQ rights. It's going to continue with our freedom of speech. It's going to continue with our right to vote. It's just going to continue until they've sapped all the freedom out of America. And we can't have that happen. We just cannot have that happen. And that is what is at stake here. We're not talking about two equal candidates. Joe Biden is a miracle statesman, a man who's basically single-handedly saved America over the last 4 years. And Donald Trump is the reason it was in such tatters, because he stole an election. He stole an election by paying off a hooker. That's what he did. If the allegations against Trump and his associates are proven true, it would reveal a disturbing willingness to subvert democratic processes for political gain. This trial is not just about hush money payments. It's about protecting the integrity of our elections and ensuring that those in power are held accountable for their actions. It's really important that this man has a fair trial, but that he also has a fair verdict. The revelations from this trial also intersect with the alarming rise of what I call the enemies of democracy, a coalition of nations, wealthy individuals, special interests, and extremist groups who are working to undermine democratic institutions. The alleged conspiracy involving Trump and his associates is just one example of how powerful figures can attempt to manipulate the political landscape through deception and concealment. As this trial unfolds and the jury deliberates, we also need to remain really focused on the central issues at stake, the subversion of democracy, as the prosecutor said today. The outcome of this case will have far-reaching consequences, not just for Donald Trump, but for the future of our democratic system. It's crucial that we as citizens remain informed and engaged, that we hold our leaders accountable and defend the principles of transparency and integrity, the freedom to decide if you want to be a rock star or a scientist, or if you want to be a truck driver or you want to be the next virtuoso. Whatever it is, you can do that in the United States. No one's telling you what to do. No one's stopping you from doing it. The freedom to decide what to do with your money. Think about that. The freedom to decide what job promotions you might be up for. The freedom to be chosen for those jobs and to be promoted for those jobs based on merit, not on the fact that you're close to the king or to Donald Trump or to whomever. The fact that only the good people get to proceed. Those are the principles the United States is built on. That's what we're preserving in this election. People are not understanding the fundamental losses that happen when we talk about losing democracy. It's not losing democracy. It's losing America. It's losing the American way of life. It's significant that people understand that. Looking across the world today, there are a couple of examples. I talk about the enemies of democracy a lot, and I talk about these four gentlemen a lot because, frankly, these are the four people who got Donald Trump elected president of the Mohammed bin Salman, President Xi, President Putin, and Bibi Netanyahu, who have been in an unusual alignment where they have realized that they needed to get the United States out of business in order to do the business that they wanted. For Putin, it was about rebuilding the Soviet Union, about getting back Ukraine. For Xi, it's about let's get back Taiwan. Let's become the world's greatest superpower. For MBS, I have no idea, but it's probably about oil, probably about money. It's probably about his soft skin that he can't handle criticism. And they've been at America for years, it seems. And you look at the new evidence around 9/11. And Bibi Netanyahu, who today is playing a game against the president of the United States, the country that has forever given protection to Israel. This man is playing a little game with Joe Biden about whether there should be a release of hostages or whether they will be attacking Rafah or not. Of course, they did attack Rafah. And of course, there was a huge humanitarian incident. Why? They want to put Joe Biden in a position where he looks weak. That's why Bibi Netanyahu is coming to speak to the houses of Congress. Bibi Netanyahu is coming there to throw a spanner in the works of the Biden campaign, to get in their face and say, hey, you guys are not being our true friends. The Republicans are going to be our true friends. Donald Trump, that's our true friend. It's going to backfire, Mr. Bibi Netanyahu, mark my words. This has been an attack on America's integrity, on America's voters, on America's livelihoods, and it's come from the outside looking in. And while many people in the United States have bought into it, and many people in the United States have profited from it, and many interest groups like white nationalists and others have woken up to the power that is available to them if they help these guys. But this is a subversion of democracy. This is a subversion of America, and it's dark, it's evil. It has no place in the world as we've been marching towards a much more perfect union and a much better civilization through the American system, through the American idea. America is under attack. They have the minds of many Americans under control through Fox News, through Twitter, or X, what it's called now, through whatever means they're using. They are fundamentally changing narratives, fundamentally changing understandings of who is doing a good job and who's doing a bad job. Joe Biden is doing a remarkable job on the world stage, because if he weren't, I don't know if there'd be a United States today. But certainly, if Donald Trump is elected, these four guys get the carte blanche to do whatever it is they want in the United States and around the world. These guys are hungry for power and authority, and they want absolute power and authority because they don't want the people having a say. In America, Vladimir Putin ignores his people, arrests them, kills them, throws them in prison, anyone who dares to oppose him. And Bibi Netanyahu is turning out to be a religious zealot. I don't even know how to describe him, who's just committing genocide on behalf of some right-wing Jewish fundamentalist supremacists. It gets to the point where you just can't believe the news as you're reading it every day, and that America would even consider siding with Donald Trump, who is this fifth member of this group here, of this quad, whatever the term might be for five quint. The fact that America is willing to vote for the fifth guy in this little boy band, that's sad. That is sad. America cannot do this, and it probably won't do this, but it won't. We can't be sure that'll be the case unless all of us stand up and say what we need to say, as I'm doing tonight, as and I hope you do every time someone asks you about this Trump trial. This Trump trial was not about the Stormy Daniels case. It's not about hush money. It's not about any of these things. What it's really about is subversion of democracy. The most dearest thing that has ever happened to humanity since the start of humanity, if you ask me, because free people seem to be a better people. Our earnings ability is better. Our ability to be the biggest economy in the world is better because we are free. And these people have come in and tried to use our freedom against us. And we need to wake up. We need to wake up, America. This is not an experiment. This is not something we're going to be able to reverse. If we elect Donald Trump, we are doomed as a country. We must elect Joe Biden. I'm not saying that as because I'm a Democrat. I'm not even sure I am. But I'm saying that as an American because every single person in this world relies on that freedom, on that North Star to be able to guide us and to be a moral compass for us all. Because without the United States, what do you think would be happening in Gaza right now? How bad a slaughter of Gazans would there be? Would there be 2 million dead people by now? Maybe. No one would even hear about it if it was up to Bibi Netanyahu and his colleagues up here. That's the world that we are facing if the United States is ruled by Donald Trump. And it's calamitous. I'm not one of those people who thinks, oh, it's not going to be instantaneous. It's going to be pretty instantaneous. They control SCOTUS. They control the House. They might control the Senate. Imagine that. They control all of that. Boy, and the presidency. It is not looking pretty. World War III is a possibility in both cases. If Donald Trump is elected and if Joe Biden is elected, we are likely to see a real upscale of aggression between us and this Chinese and Russian alliance. China basically threw itself into the war in Ukraine. The Russians basically have agreed to, with the Chinese now, to have a pact where they are going to be the supply chain for the Russian army as they try a new attack on Ukraine. This might be the moment that Vladimir Putin wins the war in Ukraine. It might be the moment that China shows its supremacy over the United States by empowering Vladimir Putin to win the war in Ukraine. And from then on, who knows what happens. Taiwan is an issue as well for the Chinese. MBS has got its own interests in Yemen and other places. You've got a lot to do, folks. And maybe America wasn't an ideal model for many people over the years, but it's certainly better than anything else we've got. A couple of notes here that I think are worth interesting and worth just noting for everybody. And one is I'm doing this thing called American Split Screen. We're just looking at contrasts between the two presidential candidates. You'll find it on my Substack. That's narrative, narativ.substack.com, plus on my.com/narrative, NARATIV. If you sign up to either of those services, you'll get access to these slides, but I'll try and distribute them at some point for free to everybody because they are important for everyone to realize. Please subscribe. The subscription is all I get, and it's not very much, but it's all we survive on until this problem is solved. But I will highlight for you what I've got coming up this week in the split screen is just the policies, the policy contrasts between Joe Biden and Donald Trump. And they're so profound that just reading down the one side of these policies, the Donald Trump side, you can see what a reactionary, dark force he is going to be to America. And then looking at what Joe Biden has achieved and plans to achieve for America, it's just, it's such a contrast. It's so obvious who the better candidate is. It just seems striking that anyone would be interested in voting for Donald Trump. And the only reason they would is because he's getting tons and tons of money from corporate entities who also want to subvert Americans. So check out my Substack, narativ.substack.com. That is the Navalny one. You see it's Navalny on there, and it's you get the general idea. Navalny. There's other ones with my face in it. If anyone cares to walk around with my face on their bag. There I am, narrative video. Check it out. Where's this one? This is from the State of the Union address this year. It was really good. Where is it? I will not bow down. It's following my face. So I will not bow down. It's all such good quality. I was really impressed. I finally got these the other day and they're so good. I don't know if you can see. Where's the camera? There it is. You can't see that there's a really good stitching here. The print work is phenomenal quality. Look at the colors in this thing. And this is amazing how it came out. The size is just right. You're going to enjoy having this to carry your convictions around with. You can carry anything in here, but it's not too big. It's not too huge. It's just the right size for anything, going to the beach or whatever, going out for the day. Make a political statement. Mention Navalny. Why not mention Navalny while you're walking around? Maybe people can think about what happens when you are in the United States versus what happens in in Russia, if you're speaking out against Vladimir Putin or whoever the dictator in the United States might end up being, look around this, say, little Navalny on your bag. It's not a big price to pay. We're talking about $39, I think, for Canadian, $29 American, if I'm not mistaken. So it's really not a very expensive proposition. You go to Libertote, Libertote, libertote.com. You've got many ways to join us by coming along to Substack, to Patreon, or on YouTube. If you're watching on YouTube, there's a good thing you can do right now where it says follow, join below here, below the screen. Just press join and join. Be a subscriber. Help fund I think, one of the few really independent voices left in the American system, which is really telling you on a regular basis what the truth is. Is anyone else telling you about Saudi Arabia today and about China and about Russia? Is anyone really reporting that? I don't think they are. You're hearing it here, and that's because I care about this stuff. I'm aware of this stuff. I've been covering this stuff for 35 years. I'm not a newbie at this. This is not something I've just started. I know what's going on in the world, and I'm trying to share it with you so you can share it with everybody. The truth matters. The truth is going to matter, especially as we figure out our way to protecting our freedom, protecting democracy in the United States.
One day, you'll tell the story of autocrats, crooks, and kings who came for our freedom. A story of citizens who stood up to tyranny and won. The people prevailed and renewed an old vow to a more perfect union. And that was just the beginning. The story continues. Narrative, where truth lives.
That's what Narrative is all about. I appreciate your time, and thank you for being here tonight on another live special. Thank you. And hey, have a good night, everybody.